This is Neil, and he made this game. In this game, you attempt to draw a perfect circle with your mouse. The closer you get to a perfectly round circle, the higher your score. I tried it a couple of times, and it turns out I'm pretty bad at it. I could waste a lot of time trying to get better. So instead, I'll waste a lot of time trying to cheat. Here's my plan. Web browsers have this cool little thing called developer tools. These tools allow you to view the layout of the website, but also they allow you to run JavaScript code to interact with the website you are viewing. For example, I can do this to change the content of the website. I want to try to write code here that draws a perfect circle. Is this actually possible to do from the developer tools? I don't know. Okay, so here are the rules. All code must be written inside the developer tools console. Rule number 2, no using libraries, meaning I cannot import other people's code. I don't know if you can actually do that from the developer console, but I'm not gonna try. And last rule, no AI, so no asking ChatGPT or a similar tool for help. I'm allowed to Google things and I can reference the AI overview just because it's hard to ignore. I mean, it's right there. But not starting a chat with it, and I'll try to avoid it as much as possible, unless I forget. Also, I only have 1 hour to do this, just to make it a little bit more fun, so here's the timer. The first thing I did was to open the developer tools and try to remember how to get elements from JavaScript. I was worried because I thought that I would have to type one line at a time, because normally that's how you do things in the developer console. But then I remembered that you can click this button, and this allows you to type multiple lines of code and run it by clicking here. And with that out of the way, we can actually start coding. The first step is to press this Go button. Looking at the HTML of the website, I can see that it's just a simple button with nothing weird. That means that I can get all the buttons in the website with this function and then take the first one since there's only one. And calling this click function should simulate a mouse click on the button. And there we go, we can now start the game with code. Once the game starts, you can start drawing. I noticed that the section where you can draw corresponds to this div element. So after looking up the documentation, I figured out a way to select that element and assign it to this variable canvas. I tried calling click on it the same way I did with the button, and that didn't work. I thought that the canvas click happened before the game was ready, and that's why it wasn't working. Like maybe you need to wait for the animation to finish or something like that. So I added this leap function that makes the code wait for some number of milliseconds, but that didn't work either. So I started looking at the HTML for clues, and that's when I saw this events button right here. When you click it, you can see a list of all the events this element is listening for. The ones we care about are mouse down, that's the event that triggers when you press a button on your mouse, and mouse move, that one triggers when you, well, move your mouse. We care about them because they are the only two mouse actions we need to simulate to draw a circle. First, we click the mouse button, and then we move the mouse in the shape of a circle. But how do you trigger those events with code, you might be asking? The answer is that I don't know. But I do know someone who knows, and that's my good friend Google. Here I found that you can call this dispatch event function that takes a mouse event object. So I looked up the mouse event documentation, and I noticed two things. Number 1 is that you can use them for both mouse down and mouse move events by setting the type. And number 2, these properties screen X and screen Y, which looks like something we can use to control the position of the simulated mouse click and mouse movement. There is also client X and client Y, which is a little confusing and the description didn't help that much, but I think at least one of them is the one we need. With this knowledge, I started experimenting and I managed to trigger a mouse down event on the canvas. This makes the website think I'm holding down my mouse button. I can tell because if I move my real mouse over the canvas, a line gets drawn. There is a small issue though. I tried to place the mouse click here, and the line seems to be coming from all the way over here, which means I'm either calculating the coordinates wrong or I'm using the wrong property to set the position in the mouse event object. After some debugging and with only half an hour left, I figured out how to make the click happen in the place I wanted, and it turns out I was doing both things wrong. To calculate the coordinates, I needed to take into account the canvas position and then add half of the width of the canvas to it. Before I was doing it without taking into account the position, so instead of the point being here, it was like over here. And to set the position of the mouse event, you need to set both screen X and Y and client X and Y to the same value. I think. I'm actually not sure, but I did it like that and it worked, so I'm not touching that. That means we successfully simulated a mouse down event, and I can place it anywhere I want. Now, my spider senses were telling me that the mouse move event will be very similar. To test it, I decided to draw a square since it's easier than a circle. To draw a square, I just need to move the mouse to each corner of the square and that should make a square. So we simulate that we start holding down the mouse button on this corner of the square. Then we simulate a mouse move to this other corner by changing the type from mouse down to mouse move and changing the X coordinate. Then we repeat the same for this corner by changing the Y coordinate and so on until we have a square. To my surprise, when I triggered the first mouse move, it actually worked. So I tried to do the same for the other corners and that didn't work as I expected. For some reason, the second mouse move didn't draw a straight line. I'm guessing because the website has some logic to make the drawing more rounder or something, I'm not sure. My guess is that this happened because the mouse movement I was simulating wasn't a smooth mouse movement. I was here and then suddenly jump all the way over here. When you move your mouse, normally it doesn't jump that many pixels. It probably triggers a lot of mouse events with very small differences in position. So instead of doing one big jump between each corner, I decided to do many small mouse movements so the website can track a straight line. To do that, I added a loop that triggers a mouse event 10 pixels at a time. This, of course, made the website stop responding. Here is the code. Can you see the error? That's right. I said continue looping until x is bigger than x plus 200, which of course is impossible. How is x ever going to be bigger than itself plus 200? So the loop ran forever and that's why the website froze. The good news is that this is actually a very easy fix. I just need to replace this x for an I, and that makes it so the loop only runs like 20 times instead of forever. The bad news is that it actually took me quite a while to see the error. Instead, I tried to fix the issue by adding a sleep in between each loop. This makes sense because JavaScript is single-threaded, meaning that it can only do one thing at a time. So I thought the website was freezing because it was too busy working on this loop instead of handling UI events and stuff like that. And by adding a sleep, even for 1 millisecond, it allows the engine to change focus from this code into other things that make the website keep working. And that actually kinda worked, even though it wasn't the real issue. The website didn't freeze anymore. Instead, it kept trying to draw a huge line that extends into infinity. This is where I finally realized the real issue and fixed it. And boom, straight line. I repeated the same for all sides and we got ourselves a square. Turns out a square is 82% of the way to a circle, so if you think about it, we're doing quite well. And it only took 50 minutes. Being serious though, we only have 10 minutes left, but the code we have currently is very close to what we need. We can start the game by clicking the Go button, we can simulate a mouse press to begin drawing, and we can move the mouse in small increments to draw a shape. The only thing that's missing is to make that shape a circle instead of a square. Fortunately for me, my brain likes to remember useless things instead of useful things. So I remember this concept from school called polar coordinates. If you are not familiar with polar coordinates, it's a different way of defining a point on a grid. Instead of being defined by its x and y coordinate, the point is defined by its distance from the origin and the angle between the x-axis and the distance line. How is this useful to draw a circle, you might be asking? Well, we can approximate the circle by placing a bunch of dots that fall within the circumference of the circle. And since we can define a point by the distance to the origin and an angle, we can just draw 360 points, one for each degree to do a full rotation. And the distance to the origin is just the radius of the circle we are drawing. This will make a perfect circle. We still need to convert those polar coordinates to normal coordinates because that's what we need to do to set the position on each mouse event. But that's not a problem because I remember from school that there is a formula to do that. I don't remember the formula, but that's why we have access to Google. So I defined a function that returns the coordinates of a point. It takes as arguments x and y, which are the coordinates of the center of the circle, a radius, and degrees. And make sure to convert degrees to radians because JavaScript math functions use radians instead of degrees. All we have to do now is call this function 360 times and we have a circle. So I replaced the code we had before to draw a square with this loop. You might have noticed that the loop iterates 366 times instead of 360. This is due to the fact that I am stupid, and for some reason I thought that a circle had 365 degrees, and I added one for extra assurance. I only realized this while editing this video, by the way. I didn't see anything wrong when I did it. But now everything is set up, and once I run the code, we should get a perfect circle. Look at that, isn't that cool? Wait. only 99.0%.